The wolf was sitting on her lunch. Malin noticed this the same moment she noticed that the wolf was the size of a small horse. She had come around the bend in the palace garden path carrying her cloth-wrapped bundle of dumplings and a thermos of barley tea, fully expecting to sit on the stone bench by the old magnolia tree, eat in peace, and spend exactly 40 minutes not thinking about the mountain of patient records waiting for her back in the healing wing. What she had not expected was a wolf, and yet there the wolf was. Black as chimney soot from nose to tail, sitting directly on top of her cloth bundle with a posture so upright and deliberate that it almost looked like he had chosen the spot on purpose. She stopped walking. The wolf looked at her. She looked at the wolf. He was, she noted with the clinical eye of someone who spent her days assessing bodies, extremely large. Not just wolf large, impractically large. The kind of large that made you wonder if the world had made a clerical error somewhere along the way. His head alone was roughly the size of her entire torso. His paws, planted flat on the stone path, were each about the size of her face. His tail curved around his haunches in a way that was almost dignified, as though he was deeply aware of how impressive he was, and had made peace with it long ago. He was also, she noted with the same clinical precision, a little round in the middle. Not unhealthy round, not worrying round, just padded, like he had been eating well and spending most of his time in a comfortable chair somewhere. Like he had not, perhaps, been chasing anything lately. He blinked at her with eyes the color of deep amber, slow and unbothered, and Malin felt the distinct impression that this creature did not consider her a threat. He considered her, if anything, mildly interesting, like a bird that had wandered into his garden. His garden. She looked around. She was technically in the outer east wing of the palace grounds. She had found this bench 3 days ago by accident, following a white butterfly through a gap in the hedge. She had not asked anyone if she was allowed here. She had simply sat down and eaten her lunch, and no one had appeared to tell her otherwise. And so she had come back every day since with the straightforward logic of a person who does not overthink permissions until they are specifically revoked. She looked back at the wolf. He looked back at her. "Hello," Malin said. The wolf's ear moved, one ear, a small swivel the way a cat might acknowledge a sound without fully committing to acknowledging the person making it. "That is my lunch you are sitting on," she said. The wolf did not appear troubled by this information. He glanced down briefly at the cloth bundle beneath him, then back up at her, with an expression that communicated, as clearly as any spoken words, that he was aware of this, and had considered it fully and still found his current position acceptable. Malin put her hands on her hips. She was 22 years old and had been a healer since she was 16, which meant she had spent 6 years developing the particular brand of patience that comes from dealing with difficult patients. Patients who did not want to take their medicine. Patients who insisted they were fine when they were clearly not fine. Patients who were very large and very proud and deeply resistant to being told what to do. She recognized this energy. "Okay," she said. She walked forward slowly, the way she moved around patients who were frightened, not because she thought this wolf was frightened. He looked about as frightened as a mountain looks frightened of rain, but because she had learned that slow movement communicated respect, and she respected any creature that could sit that still with that kind of confidence. She stopped about 2 feet away. This close, she could see that his fur was extremely thick, layered like expensive winter cloth, and that it had a faint blue-black sheen in the afternoon light that was honestly quite beautiful. She could also confirm that yes, the belly situation was real. There was a definite softness there that his upright posture was doing its very best to disguise. She crouched down to his level. He watched her with those amber eyes, patient and utterly unreadable. "I am Malin," she said, because she always introduced herself to patients, and this felt like a patient situation. "I am new here. I arrived 8 days ago from the eastern province. I work in the healing wing on the second corridor." She paused. "I do not know if wolves care about any of that. I am telling you anyway." His ear twitched again, both ears this time. "I had 6 dumplings in that bundle," she continued conversationally, "and I am genuinely hoping you have not eaten them already, because I made them myself this morning and they are filled with pork and ginger, and I was looking forward to them all day." The wolf stood up. He did this with a kind of slow, unfolding grace that was surprising for something his size, the way a large tree might straighten itself in the wind, and Malin rocked back on her heels slightly from the sheer presence of him suddenly being at full height. He was standing considerably taller than she had estimated from across the path. The top of his back was level with her shoulder. His head raised was well above hers. He stepped to the side. Her lunch bundle sat on the stone, slightly flattened but apparently intact. Malin looked at the bundle. She looked up at the wolf. He had turned slightly, still watching her, and his expression, if a wolf could be said to have expressions, and this one very much could, said something like, "Go ahead then." She picked up the bundle, unwrapped it. The cloth had protected the thermos and the small tin container inside. She opened the tin. 6 dumplings, slightly squashed on one side but otherwise perfect. She let out a small breath of genuine relief. "Thank you," she said. The wolf sat back down. He did not leave. He simply settled himself back onto his haunches a little off to the side of the bench and watched her with the calm certainty of someone who intended to stay. Malin sat on the bench. She opened her thermos. She poured herself a small cup of barley tea, thought for a moment, and looked at the wolf. He was watching the dumplings. Not in a desperate way, not in a hungry, frantic way, just watching them the same way he had watched everything else, with that deep amber patience. But there was something in the angle of his head, a slight forward tilt, just barely, that she recognized. She had seen it in patients who did not want to ask for something. "Are you hungry?" she asked. The head tilt stopped. He looked at her face instead. "I made 6, she said. "I normally only eat 4. I packed 2 extra today because I thought I might be hungry later, but honestly I probably will not be. I never am." She held one out toward him, flat on her palm. "You can have 1 or 2, I do not mind." He did not lunge. He did not grab. He lowered his enormous head slowly and took the dumpling from her hand with a gentleness that was almost startling, barely any pressure, just warmth, a breath of air, and then the dumpling was gone. She felt the faintest brush of something against her palm, warm, dry, like the edge of a very large, very careful hand. She gave him a second one without being asked. He ate it with the same careful delicacy. She ate her 4, drank her tea, and they sat together in the garden in a silence that felt, against all reasonable expectation, completely comfortable. The magnolia above them was dropping white petals in a slow, lazy way. Somewhere beyond the hedge she could hear palace staff moving around. The afternoon light was warm and golden and just slightly sleepy. "You are very round for something your size," she said at one point, not unkindly, just observationally. "Have you been getting enough exercise?" The wolf's ear flattened, just one, for just a moment. "I am not criticizing," she added quickly. "I am a healer. I think about these things professionally. You look healthy, you just look a little comfortable, which is fine. Comfortable is not a bad way to look." She screwed the lid back onto her thermos. "I am going to call you Chubby," she said, making the decision the way she made most decisions, quickly and without a great deal of agonizing. "Because you are very large and very soft and it seems to fit. Unless you have another name. Do you have another name?" He stared at her. "Chubby it is," she said. She gathered her things, stood up, stretched her arms above her head and looked down at him. He was still sitting, still watching, still utterly unreadable. And yet she had the strange, warm certainty that he had not hated a single moment of the past 40 minutes. "I will be back tomorrow," she said. "Same time, I will probably bring more dumplings." She walked back through the garden, through the gap in the hedge, and disappeared back in the direction of the healing wing. The wolf sat on the stone path beside the magnolia tree for a long time after she left. His name was not Chubby. His name was Calder Holt, and he was the alpha king of 7 territories, and he had not sat in that garden in 4 years because the garden reminded him of his mother, who had planted the magnolia herself, and he had come out this afternoon in wolf form because one of his advisors had said something in a council meeting that had made him want to bite someone, and the only responsible alternative had been to leave. He had not expected a small woman in a healer's uniform to walk around the corner and greet him like he was a stray she had found on the road. He had not expected her to give him dumplings and call him Chubby and ask about his exercise routine. He turned this over in his mind, the whole encounter, the way she had spoken to him, not afraid, not reverent, not trying to impress him or manage him or ask him for anything, just talking to him, just sitting with him, like he was simply someone she had found in a garden and decided to be kind to. He could not remember the last time someone had simply been kind to him. He looked at the stone path where she had been standing. He would be here tomorrow. She was back the next day at the same time with 8 dumplings. "I made extra," she said, sitting down on the bench and finding him already there, already sitting in his spot off to the side, already watching the path she came down. "I could not sleep last night, so I was up early and I had time." He had in fact been sitting in that spot for 20 minutes before she arrived. He had also in fact told his chief advisor, Lord Harwick, that his afternoon schedule was to be cleared between the hours of noon and 2 indefinitely for what he described as a private matter. Harwick had noted this with the serene, practiced face of a man who had served the royal house for 30 years and had learned not to ask questions. Malin divided the dumplings without drama, 4 for her, 4 for him. She handed his across one at a time, and he took each one with the same careful delicacy as the day before, and she ate hers and drank her tea and talked to him about her morning. She talked, he had discovered, the way some people breathed not because she needed to fill silence, but because she genuinely wanted to say the things she was saying. She talked about a patient she had seen that morning who had been convinced he was dying of something serious and had turned out to have a mild herb allergy. She talked about the head healer, a woman named Dolers, who ran the wing with the precision of someone who had once been a military officer and had never quite let it go. She talked about the way the palace corridors echoed, and how she kept getting lost between the east and west wings, because someone had decided, apparently, that having the same stone arch appear in 3 different locations was a good architectural choice. He listened to all of it. He listened to the way her voice shifted when something genuinely bothered her versus when she was only mildly annoyed. He listened to the rhythm of her sentences, the small pauses where she was gathering a thought, the moments where she laughed at her own observation before she had quite finished making it. He had been in rooms full of people his entire life, rooms full of important people saying important things, and he could not remember the last time he had listened to someone this closely. "You have very calming eyes," she told him on the 3rd day, looking directly into them with the professional assessment of a person who had learned to read a lot from eyes. "Very steady. Some wolves, when I have treated them, had very nervous energy in their eyes. You do not have that. You look like nothing surprises you very much." He was being called Chubby by a woman who had no idea who he was and was commenting on his eyes, and he felt, somehow, less surprised by this than by most things that had happened to him recently. On the 4th day she brought a small jar of pickled vegetables along with the dumplings. "I found a woman at the market who sells these," she said, "and I bought some and then I ate all of them at dinner, and then I felt terrible about it and went back this morning and bought 3 more jars. I am going to try to pace myself with this jar. Do not let me eat the whole thing in one sitting." He put one paw very gently on the jar. She laughed. It was not a polished laugh, not the kind people performed when they wanted to seem delightful. It was a surprised laugh, a real one, and it startled a pair of sparrows out of the magnolia tree above them. On the 5th day she brought a small cloth and wiped down the stone bench before she sat on it, because it had rained the night before. Then she looked at his spot on the path and said, "Oh," and went back to the hedge and pulled out a large flat stone she had apparently wedged there at some earlier point and placed it where he usually sat, making a dry, slightly elevated seat. He looked at the stone. He looked at her. She was already sitting on her bench, opening her thermos. "I put it there yesterday," she explained without looking up. "The ground was muddy and you did not seem like you wanted to move, so I thought, you know. It seemed rude not to do something about it." He sat on the stone. She poured her tea. It was on the 6th day that she first mentioned his weight, directly, not critically, just with the open curiosity of someone who had been thinking about something and saw no reason not to say it. "You are carrying weight in a way that suggests you do not move much," she said, studying him with her head tilted slightly. "Which is strange because your muscle structure underneath is actually very good, your shoulders especially. You have very nice shoulders, Chubby. Whoever you were before you got comfortable, you were quite impressive." She paused. "You could be again if you wanted, not that you need to be, you are impressive now. Just in a softer direction." He was, he reflected, the alpha king of 7 territories. He had been described by every court poet in living memory as the most formidable warrior ruler since the age of the first kings. He was sitting on a stone beside a magnolia tree, being told he was impressive in a softer direction. "You should move more," she continued, chewing a dumpling thoughtfully. "I am not saying you are unwell, I am just saying you have all that potential just sitting there, it seems like a waste." She glanced at his midsection with the dispassionate eye of a professional. Not a lot of movement, but some, even a walk in the mornings would do something. She looked back up at his face. Unless you are happy as you are, which is also completely valid, I just notice things. It is a problem sometimes. He stood up. He walked 3 full laps of the garden deliberately, while she watched him with mild surprise, and then he came back and sat down again. She stared at him for a moment. Then she said, "That was very cooperative, good boy." He felt something shift in his chest, not embarrassment, not offense, something more complicated, something quieter, a warmth that he had not felt in a long time and did not immediately have a name for. Nobody had called him a good boy since he was 8 years old, and his father was still alive. He did not show that it had affected him. He was, among other things, extraordinarily well practiced at not showing things. He looked at her with his level amber gaze, and she gave him the last dumpling and told him she had a long afternoon ahead, so she would see him tomorrow. She stood up, gathered her things, and paused. "You know," she said, looking at him with a small frown that was not unkind, "I keep saying I will ask around about where you came from, whether you belong to anyone, but then I come here and you seem so," she searched for the word, "settled, like you know exactly where you are supposed to be." She shook her head slightly. "I do not think you are lost." She went back through the hedge. He sat very still in the garden for a long time after. He was not lost. He was the king of everything she could see from any window in this palace, and the garden she sat in every afternoon was technically his by inheritance and law and 7 territorial agreements, and the bench she sat on had been carved from the pale stone of the western quarry and placed there by palace groundskeepers he could dismiss with a word. He was not lost. But for the first time in a very long time, sitting in his mother's garden in the afternoon light with white petals falling, and a woman who called him Chubby and asked if he was getting enough exercise, he felt briefly found. It was on the 7th day that he began to understand the scope of what was happening to him. He had called for his captain of the guard, Owen, at 6 in the morning, under the pretense of reviewing the Eastern Gate rotation. Owen, who was 53 and had the weathered patience of someone who had watched the royal family do inexplicable things for 3 decades, had arrived promptly and reviewed the gate rotation with him, and then stood at attention and waited, because kings did not call their captains of the guard at 6 in the morning to discuss gate rotations. "Do we have any healers in the palace from the Eastern Province?" Calder said, not looking up from the map on his desk. "We do," Owen said. 3 arrived last month. They are part of the quarterly rotation from the Provincial Medical Board. One of them," he paused, "she is young, small. She talks a great deal." Owen kept his face perfectly still. "I will need a little more to go on, sir. She has her lunch in the East Garden every afternoon." A very small pause. Owen said, "I believe that may be Malin Foster, sir. She came from Creston in the lower Eastern Province. She is 22. She has been a licensed healer for 6 years. Her record is excellent, no disciplinary marks. Her supervisors in Creston described her as very thorough and extremely talkative." Owen's face did not move. Their words. "Foster," Calder said. "Yes, sir." He looked at the map. "Is she well?" Another pause, smaller this time. "I have no reason to believe otherwise, sir." "Good." He moved a marker on the map. "That will be all." Owen left with the face of a man who had just been given a very interesting piece of information, and had absolutely no intention of doing anything with it, except carrying it around in his chest until he understood it better. That afternoon, Calder sat in the East Garden, and Malin came around the corner at her usual time and set down her lunch on the bench, and looked at him with the same open, uncomplicated warmth she always had. "Chubby," she said as a greeting, not as a question, not as a name she was testing, just as a fact, as if it were simply what he was called. He sat on his stone. She told him about a conversation she had overheard between 2 junior healers that morning that had made her almost choke on her morning tea with laughter. She told him about a letter she had received from her younger brother, who was 12, and had apparently decided he wanted to be a cartographer when he grew up, and was making increasingly elaborate maps of increasingly small areas. And his most recent letter had included a detailed map of their family's kitchen that showed, with great precision, where the good snacks were hidden. She showed him the letter. He could read every word of it from where he was sitting, because his wolf form had exceptional eyesight, and the map was, he had to admit, genuinely excellent cartographic work for a 12-year-old. "He is very serious about it," she said fondly. "He has always been like that." He finds one thing and he commits to it completely. She folded the letter back up and tucked it into her pocket. I admire that. I have always wanted to be like that. I am more of a notices everything, commits to nothing for very long kind of person. She looked at the magnolia tree. Except the dumplings, she said. I have committed to the dumplings. He looked at her profile. The way the afternoon light came at a certain angle and made everything softer. The small frown she got when she was thinking about something she had not quite worked out yet. The way she held her thermos cup with both hands even when it was not particularly cold. He thought about what Owen had said. Malin Foster from Creston, 22 years old, excellent record, extremely talkative. He thought about the way she had put a stone down for him to sit on because the ground was muddy, and it seemed rude not to do something about it. He thought about the fact that she had come out here every single day and talked to him without ever once asking who he belonged to, or whether he was dangerous, or whether she was supposed to be here, or whether sitting in the East Garden feeding dumplings to a large black wolf was going to get her in some kind of professional trouble. She had just sat down and talked, and shared her food, and asked about his exercise. He was not going to tell her who he was. He understood, sitting there in the golden afternoon, that this decision was not rational. He understood that it would create complications. He understood that at some point, inevitably, someone was going to say something, and the whole uncomplicated warmth of these 40 minutes every afternoon was going to become complicated. He understood all of that. He decided anyway. He was going to sit in this garden every afternoon for as long as she kept coming. He was going to eat her dumplings and listen to her talk about her patients and her brother's maps and the echoing corridors. He was going to sit on the stone she had put down for him and be called Chubby and asked about his exercise routine. Nobody needed to know. She stood up and stretched, the same way she always did, arms up over her head, thermos tucked under one elbow. She looked down at him. You know what I thought about this morning, she said. I thought about the fact that you were sitting on my lunch the first time I saw you, and you showed absolutely no remorse about it. And I thought, that is the kind of confidence I want to have someday. She nodded, as if confirming this to herself. Just total peace with your choices. He looked at her. She pointed at him. You are genuinely one of the most serene creatures I have ever met, Chubby. I mean that as a compliment. She went through the hedge. He stayed until the light changed. Then he shifted back into human form behind the old stone wall at the edge of the garden, where the overgrown ivy blocked the sight line from all 3 nearby windows, and he walked back into the palace through the private east corridor, and he nodded once to the guard at the door, and he went back to being the alpha king of 7 territories. He went directly to the palace gymnasium, which had not been used since the previous winter, and spent an hour doing exactly what a woman who called him Chubby had suggested, because she was right, and because he had been neglecting himself, and because he was not going to examine any of this too carefully. His personal attendant, a young man named Cole who had been with him for 3 years and had long since learned to observe without comment, found him there, noted his presence in the gymnasium with a carefully blank face, and left a clean training cloth on the bench without being asked. Calder worked until sweat ran down his back, and his shoulders ached in the satisfying way that meant something was happening, and he thought about nothing except the work. He told himself this was about health. He told himself that entirely. He went to sleep that night and dreamed, for the first time in years, about something other than council meetings and border disputes. He did not remember what the dream was in the morning. But he woke up with a feeling like a window had been opened somewhere. You look thinner, Malin said on the 14th day. She was standing in front of him with her head tilted, studying him the way she studied patience, which was very directly and without any pretense of politeness about it. He sat on his stone and let her look. He had objectively been in the gymnasium every morning for the past week. He had also been running the old route along the north wall of the palace grounds at dawn, which he had not done in almost 2 years. Did you take my advice? She said, sounding genuinely delighted. He held her gaze. You did not you? She put her hands on her hips. Her face was doing the thing it did when she was trying not to look too pleased with herself and failing. Chubby. I am actually proud of you. She sat down on the bench and opened her lunch and pointed at him with a dumpling. See, I knew it. I knew there was a very impressive wolf under there. You have really good bone structure. You just needed activation. She said the word like it was obvious, like getting up and moving was simply a matter of deciding to, which he supposed for her it probably was. She had the energy of someone who had never in their life had to convince themselves to do things. She simply did them and then talked about them afterward. "Keep going," she told him. "Whatever you are doing, it is working." He ate his dumplings. She told him about a wolf shifter she had treated that morning who had come in for a routine exam, and had been so tense in his human form that she had been able to see the tension in his jaw from across the room, and she had spent 30 minutes getting him to relax enough to let her take his blood pressure, mostly by talking about completely unrelated things, which was her preferred treatment method for people who were too wound up to accept being helped directly. "I talk at them," she said, "until they forget to be tense." He looked at her. She looked back at him. "Is that what you think I am doing to you?" she said. He held her gaze steadily. She tilted her head. "Are you tense, Chubby?" He was the alpha king of 7 territories who had not slept more than 4 consecutive hours in approximately 3 years, and who had not sat in this garden since the death of his mother, and who had been described by 3 separate diplomatic delegations as the single most formidable and unapproachable ruler of the current age. He was not going to answer that question. She nodded slowly as if he had. "Okay," she said quietly, not with pity, just with understanding. "Okay, well, you know where to find me." She handed him the last dumpling. He took it from her hand, the same way he always did, with the same careful gentleness, and she held his amber gaze for one moment longer than usual, and then she looked back at her thermos and poured the last of her tea and said, "I'm making a different filling tomorrow. My supervisor Dolers told me about a herb paste she grew up with that apparently goes very well with pork, and I am going to try it. So tomorrow's dumplings might be experimental, just so you are prepared. Consider yourself warned," she added. He stayed in the garden until the light went gold and low, long past when he would normally have gone back to the palace. The magnolia dropped its petals in the quiet. He thought, sitting there, that he had no idea what to do with this. He had no framework for it, no precedent, no advisory protocol. He ran 7 territories. He commanded armies. He sat in rooms where every single person present was performing carefully for him at all times, calibrating what they said and how they held themselves and what they asked for. She had not performed for him once. She talked to him like he was someone worth talking to. He could not explain, not in any terms he found satisfying, why that felt more significant than anything that had happened to him in several years. He went back inside. He went to the gymnasium again. Cole left a clean cloth on the bench without being asked, and said nothing, and Calder worked until his shoulders ached and his mind was quiet. "Chubby," she had said. "And then keep going, whatever you are doing, it is working." He kept going. The story got out before Calder did. He was in a finance review meeting with 4 senior advisors and his head treasurer when he first heard a sound that did not belong in a finance review meeting. It was quiet, barely anything, just a small exhaled breath from the direction of the young scribe who was taking notes in the corner. The scribe's face was entirely professional when Calder glanced at him, but the page in front of him was suspiciously blank, as if he had recently decided that nothing anyone had said in the last 2 minutes needed to be written down. Calder looked at the scribe. The scribe looked at his blank page. Calder looked back at the treasurer, who was explaining something about grain levies. He filed the moment away. It was Lord Harwick, his chief advisor, who first brought him something close to a report on the situation, though Harwick was careful, in the way that a man of 30 years' experience is careful, to frame it as something he had merely happened to overhear. "There is," Harwick said, standing at a precise and respectful distance from Calder's desk, "some conversation in the palace about a wolf, in the East Garden, a large black one." He paused with the air of a man choosing his next words the way a person chooses where to step across a frozen pond. "The conversation originates, I believe, from the healing wing." Calder set down the letter he was reading. "Go on." "The healer, I understand, has been describing the wolf to her colleagues." Another pause, at some length. "What has she said?" Harwick's expression was a masterpiece of trained neutrality. "She has described him as very large, very gentle, and softly puts her somewhat round." A silence developed in the room. "She is also reported," Harwick continued, now studying a point approximately 6 inches above Calder's head, to have named the wolf. The name is apparently Chubby. The silence in the room became a different kind of silence. Calder said nothing. Harwick, who was among the most experienced people in the entire kingdom at reading royal silences, identified this particular one as the kind that required him to continue. She has apparently told several colleagues about the wolf, with some enthusiasm. She has described him as, and I am quoting here, sir, from what I was told, enormous, a little doughy and very sweet with kind eyes. He stopped. I thought you should be aware. Calder was very still for a moment. Thank you, Harwick, he said, that will be all. Harwick left with the same precise, unhurried pace he had entered with, and he kept his face exactly as it was all the way down the corridor, and around the corner and into the small antechamber where he stopped, stood completely still, and closed his eyes for 3 seconds. Then he kept walking, and he did not mention it again to anyone. The scribe, however, had mentioned it to the junior clerk he shared a writing room with. The junior clerk had mentioned it to the kitchen assistant who brought their afternoon tea. The kitchen assistant had mentioned it to the laundryman who came to pick up the linen. The laundryman had mentioned it to his wife, who worked in the fabric storage room of the palace's east wing, 2 corridors down from the healing department. By the time Malin arrived at her desk the next morning, 2 of the junior healers who shared her workspace had already heard a version of the story, and one of them, a cheerful young woman named Clara who had been at the palace for 2 years, and had the social awareness of someone who had been paying very close attention for all of that time, was watching Malin settle in with the particular expression of someone who has something they are waiting for the right moment to say. The right moment, Clara had decided, was now. Is it true, she said, as Malin unwrapped her stethoscope, that you have a wolf in the East Garden? Malin looked up. Yes, she said, immediately and without hesitation. He has been there every day for about 2 weeks now. He is very large and very calm. I have been eating lunch with him. Clara stared at her. You have been eating lunch with a wild wolf. He might not be wild. He sits very politely and he has never once made me feel uneasy, which, for the record, I cannot say about every person I have met in this palace. Malin located her morning patient list and began reading it. He is very good company. Clara and the other junior healer, a young man named Eli who tended to react to everything with a 2-second delay while he absorbed it, both looked at each other. What does he look like? Clara asked. Enormous, Malin said, black fur, very thick. He has amber eyes that are honestly quite something, very steady. And he is, she paused, searching for the word, well-built but comfortable. He used to have a softness to him. He has been looking firmer lately, actually. I think he took my advice about getting more exercise. Another shared glance between Clara and Eli. You advised the wolf, Eli said, after his standard 2-second delay, to exercise more. Professionally, Malin said, I am a healer. I noticed he was carrying excess weight for his frame and I said something. He started moving more. He is looking much better. She turned to her first patient file. I am very pleased with his progress. Clara opened her mouth and then closed it again. Eli said, after a longer pause than usual, has anyone told you who that wolf might be? Malin looked up. Number should they have? He is just, Eli paused, in the East Garden. Specifically? Yes. The East Garden is, another pause, the private garden for the royal family. Malin considered this. Well, she said after a moment, he seems very at home there, so maybe he belongs to the palace in some way. She went back to her patient file. He has been very respectful of the space. He has never dug anything up or knocked anything over. I think the groundskeepers would have complained if he was causing problems. Clara and Eli looked at each other again with the careful, loaded look of 2 people who have just watched someone step off a cliff while talking about the view. They did not say anything else. Malin, for her part, gave the wolf no further thought for the rest of the morning, which was busy enough to fill her head completely. She had 7 patients scheduled, plus 2 walk-ins before lunch, plus a consultation with head healer Dolers about a treatment protocol for the 3rd-floor staff quarters where 3 people had developed similar symptoms over the past week. Dolers was a compact woman in her late 50s who communicated primarily in very precise sentences and small, significant looks. She had been head of the healing wing for 12 years, and she had the slightly terrifying quality of seeming to already know things before you told them to her. She was also, Malin had noticed, completely unmoved by anything. In the 2 weeks Malin had been here, Dolores had dealt with a staff crisis, 2 difficult patients, a supply shortage, and one extremely dramatic young guard who had convinced himself he was dying of something that turned out to be dehydration, all without altering her expression by any measurable amount. But today, when Malin arrived for their consultation, Dolores looked at her for 1/2 second longer than usual before saying, "Sit down, Foster." Malin sat. "I understand," Dolores said, placing her hands flat on the desk in the way she did when she was being deliberate, "that you have been visiting the East Garden." "Yes," Malin said, "for lunch. I found a very nice spot by the magnolia tree. I hope that is all right. No one told me it was off limits." Dolores held her gaze. "It is not off limits. The garden is open to palace staff." She paused. "Have you encountered anyone there?" Malin thought about this. "There is a wolf," she said. "A large one, very black. He comes every day." Dolores was quiet for a moment. "Do you know whose wolf he is?" she said. Malin shook her head. "I assumed he might belong to the palace somehow. He seems very comfortable there. He does not appear to have an owner in the traditional sense. He behaves more like," she considered, "a resident than a pet." "A resident," Dolores said. "Yes, very settled, very calm. He has been, actually I have been a little worried about him professionally. He seemed quite still when I first met him, not unwell but underactive. He has been moving more lately. I encouraged him too." Dolores was quiet for another moment, in the particular way of a woman who is deciding something. "Foster," she said finally, "I am going to give you a piece of advice, which is, continue to eat your lunch where you have been eating it, and continue to be exactly as you are." She picked up her pen. "Just, perhaps do not repeat your professional assessments of the wolf too widely." Malin nodded, slightly puzzled. "Is there a concern?" "No concern," Dolores said. "You may go." Malin went. Dolores sat alone in her office for a moment and looked at the middle distance, and then she picked up her pen and wrote a very short note and sealed it, and gave it to the hallway attendant with an instruction to deliver it to the north residential wing, 2nd floor, and to wait for no reply. Calder received the note that evening. It said in Dolores' extremely neat handwriting, "She does not know, she is being kind. I thought you should hear it from someone who has seen both things at once." He folded it once and put it in the drawer where he kept things he intended to think about carefully. He had known Dolores since he was a child. She had been working in the palace healing wing since before he was born, and she had held his mother's hand during the illness that took her, and she was one of perhaps 4 people in his life who would write him a note that said exactly what she meant and no more. She does not know. He sat with that for a while. In his experience, people always knew. They knew who he was before he entered a room because someone had told them. They adjusted themselves before he arrived. They had already rehearsed. The not knowing, the complete, genuine, uncalculated not knowing, was so rare in his life that he had almost stopped expecting it to happen. But Malin Foster from Creston, who packed 6 dumplings for lunch and gave him half, who put a flat stone down for him to sit on because the ground was muddy, who had told him he had very good bone structure and he just needed activation, she did not know. She was being kind. He thought about her sitting at her desk in the healing wing, telling Clara and Eli about her wolf in the East Garden. Enormous, doughy, very sweet, kind eyes. He thought about the way she had said it, probably with the same open, uncomplicated warmth that she said everything. He thought about what his court would do with this information. He had found out that day, from 3 separate channels, that the story of the wolf in the East Garden was circulating. Not maliciously, nobody in his palace was suicidal enough to mock him intentionally, but the story had a life of its own now, the way stories do when they contain something surprising and warm and funny all at once. People were repeating it because it was a good story, because it had the quality of something that made you feel slightly better about the world. The Alpha King, sitting in his mother's garden, being called Chubby, and advised about his exercise by a 22-year-old healer from Creston who had absolutely no idea who he was. He understood why it was a good story. He understood also that it was going to get harder to contain as time went on. He picked up his training schedule, which Cole had written out on a clean page and left on his desk without comment. It was aggressive. He had asked for aggressive. He had told Cole he wanted to see measurable results in 4 weeks, and Cole, who was thorough and competent, and had the good sense not to ask why the king had suddenly decided to start training at dawn after 2 years of doing very little of it, had written up a schedule that would, in 4 weeks, produce measurable results. He studied the schedule. He thought about the way she had said, in the exact same tone she would use to discuss a patient file, "You could be quite impressive again if you wanted." He already was impressive, technically. But she had not seen that. She had seen a comfortable wolf on a stone bench eating dumplings. And from that she had looked at his structure, at what was underneath, and she had said, "There is something good here. It is just waiting to be brought back." He had not had anyone look at him and say there is something good here in a very long time. Mostly people looked at him and saw the throne. He went to sleep with the training schedule on the desk and the note in the drawer, and he woke at 5 in the morning with the particular alertness of someone who has decided something overnight and arrived at the morning already in motion. He was in the gymnasium by 5:15. Cole appeared at 5:40 with water and a towel, said nothing, and left. It was the scribe in the end who cracked first. His name was Ned, and he was 24, and he had been Calder's court scribe for 8 months, which was the longest he had been anything, because before that he had been a junior clerk, and before that he had been an apprentice, and in every position he had held, the most significant recurring problem he faced was that he found things funny, not inappropriately. He had excellent timing in that he almost always managed to wait until the funny thing was out of immediate range before reacting to it. Almost always. He had been at the finance review meeting when Harwick arrived to speak to Calder, and he had been the scribe on duty in the outer corridor later that week, when 2 senior staff members walked past discussing what the Omega healer had told her colleagues about the wolf's weight loss progress, and he had, at this point, heard enough assembled details of the situation that he had developed a picture in his mind that was very, very difficult to maintain a straight face about. The picture was the Alpha King, the most feared and formidable ruler of the current age, doing lunges at dawn because a healer from Creston called him doughy. He managed the straight face for another 3 days. Then on a Thursday afternoon, he was collecting documents from Calder's study when he passed the window that looked out over the east garden, and he saw at the bench by the magnolia tree a small woman in a healer's uniform sitting with a thermos, talking to a very large black wolf with the easy, familiar warmth of someone chatting with a close friend, and the wolf was sitting on a flat stone that had been placed precisely in his spot, and she was gesturing with a dumpling as she made her point. And the wolf was watching her with amber eyes and the focused, patient attention of something that had exactly nowhere else it wanted to be. Ned stopped walking. He looked at this scene for approximately 5 seconds. Then he made the sound. It was not a loud sound. It was barely a sound at all. It was the sound a person makes when they have been holding something in for a very long time and their body has decided, unilaterally, that this is the moment. It was a small, involuntary exhaled noise somewhere between a breath and a laugh. Calder was at his desk. He heard it. He turned and looked at Ned, who had gone completely, rigidly still, the way a person goes still when they have realized they have made a sound in a room where they were supposed to be silent, and whose face was doing the particular thing that faces do when a person is employing every muscle they possess in the service of neutrality and only barely succeeding. Calder looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the window. Then he looked back at Ned. "Pack your things," he said. Ned stopped breathing. "You are being reassigned," Calder said. "Effective immediately, Northern Wall Post, report to Captain Owen." Ned said, "Yes, sir," in a voice that was perfectly steady and left with perfect posture, and it was only once he was well down the corridor, past 2 turns and a staircase, that he leaned against the wall and thought, well, it was worth it. And it was cold at the Northern Wall Post, very cold, and he stood at it for 2 weeks before Owen, with the practiced mercy of a man who managed these situations regularly, quietly reassigned him back. But for those 5 seconds by the window, watching the Alpha King of 7 territories sitting in careful, patient attention, while a healer from Creston gestured at him with a dumpling and told him about her morning, Ned felt that he had witnessed something that would be one of his best memories for the rest of his life. He was right about that. Malin, entirely unaware of any of this, was having one of her better afternoons. She had finished her shift early, for once, because 2 of her afternoon patients had cancelled, and she had managed to finish her notes before the cancellations rather than after, which was her habit and the reason she usually stayed late. She had packed her lunch with care, adding a small container of the pickled vegetables she was rationing, and she had come to the garden slightly ahead of schedule and found Chubby there already, sitting in his spot with the settled patience of someone who had simply been waiting and was entirely comfortable with the waiting. She had looked at him when she sat down, and she had to admit to herself, felt a warmth that went somewhat beyond what a person usually feels upon sitting down to eat lunch near a stray wolf, something that felt more like relief, like the particular release of tension that comes when a day has been long and a little hard, and then something good happens at the end of it, something reliable. She had patients she cared about, she had colleagues she liked. She had her brother's letters and her dumpling recipes and her barley tea. But this garden, this wolf, these 40 minutes, she had not expected them. She had not arranged for them. They had simply appeared the way the best things sometimes did from around a corner and into her afternoon, and they had kept appearing every day, and every day they had been exactly what she needed. She looked at him now, at his profile, at the way the light lay on his black fur and turned the edges of it a deep, shifting blue. "Chubby," she said, not to get his attention, she already had it, but just because she liked saying it. "I think you might be my favorite person in this palace." He turned to look at her. "I know you are not a person," she said, "technically, but you take the title anyway. Everyone else in this building is either very busy or very important or both, and they do not have a lot of time to just be somewhere. You just be here." She tilted her head. "I admire that." She opened her lunch. She gave him 3 dumplings without counting, which she had not done before. He ate them one at a time slowly with that same careful gentleness, and she thought that she had treated wolves before in the eastern provinces, patients who were always a little apologetic about their nature, a little uncertain about how much space they were allowed to take up. This wolf did not have that. This wolf took exactly the space he needed and no more, and did not apologize for any of it, and she found this, in a way she could not quite articulate, deeply comforting. "I hope whoever you belong to knows how good you are," she said. The wolf looked at her with his amber eyes. "I hope they tell you," she added. She poured her tea and drank it in the afternoon light, and the magnolia petals fell, and neither of them said anything else for a while, and it was, as these 40 minutes always were, exactly enough. She left at her usual time with her usual goodbye. He stayed until the light went. The thing about a good story is that it does not stay where you put it. Maylin was not trying to tell a story. She was simply talking about her life, the way she always had, with the natural, warm overflow of a person who processes the world partly by describing it to people. She talked about Chubby because Chubby was part of her days now, a consistent and genuinely good part, and it would have felt strange not to mention him. So she mentioned him. At lunch, to Clara, who had started eating in the staff room at the same time as Maylin because she found Maylin entertaining. To Eli, who was quiet by nature but had discovered that sitting near Maylin meant you got a constant, pleasant stream of interesting small things to listen to while you ate. To the older healer on the 3rd floor, a man named Bernard who had been at the palace for 15 years, and who reacted to everything Maylin said with a careful, measured expression that Maylin had not yet learned to decode. To the woman who brought around the afternoon herbal supplies, whose name was Petra, and who was fascinated. "A wolf," Petra said, holding her supply basket and standing in the doorway of the storage room while Maylin inventoried the willow bark. "In the East Garden." "Every day," Maylin confirmed, counting jars. "And you just eat lunch with him?" "He is very good company, he listens well." Maylin moved a jar. "He has been getting thinner, actually. I think he has been exercising." Petra stared at her. "You think a wolf has been following a fitness regimen?" "I suggested it and he went and did 3 laps of the garden immediately," Maylin said, "which is more compliance than I get from most of my human patients. He has honestly been very proactive about it." Petra opened her mouth and then closed it. She looked like she was doing some kind of internal calculation that was not resolving cleanly. "He is lovely," Maylin added in case this helped. "Very large, very black. He has eyes that are—" She paused in her counting. "I do not know how to describe them, like amber but deep, like there is a lot behind them." She made a small sound that was not quite any particular emotion and went back to the jars. "He called Chubby, I named him." Petra looked at her for one more moment, then nodded very slowly, and said she would be back with the next batch of supplies, and she left. In the corridor outside, she stood very still for 3 seconds. Then she went to find her friend Nora, who worked in the document office on the ground floor, because Nora needed to hear this immediately. The story had, by the 3rd week, acquired a kind of inevitability to it. It moved through the palace the way all good things do, not as gossip exactly, because gossip implies unkindness, and nobody who heard this story felt anything except a warm, complicated sort of delight that they could not quite explain. It moved as a thing people wanted to tell other people because the telling of it produced a particular feeling, a light feeling, the feeling of something that was, against all expectation, very good. The details stayed consistent, which was itself unusual. Stories in palaces tend to change as they travel, picking up embellishments, dropping the quieter elements that are harder to translate. But this one stayed close to the truth because the truth was already the best version of it. A small healer from Creston, a very large wolf, a garden bench and a cloth bundle of dumplings, and a name chosen with total sincerity. Chubby. The name was the thing. The name was what people kept coming back to. Not because it was unkind. Malin had not meant it unkindly, and somehow everyone could hear that in the telling of it, could feel the complete absence of cruelty in it. But because it had the quality of a thing said by someone who saw exactly what was in front of them and reported it simply and directly, without any of the management and calibration and performance that everyone in a palace employs constantly, always. People who worked in palaces spent a great deal of time choosing what to say and how to say it. They weighed words. They adjusted the angle. They thought about how the listener would receive what they were about to give them. Malin had looked at the Alpha King in wolf form and said, "You are very round for something your size," and asked if he was getting enough exercise. People wanted to be near that. They could not have said exactly why, but they wanted to be near it, and so they told the story, and each telling kept it close to the original, because changing it would have meant losing the thing that made it feel so good. Bernard, the 3rd-floor healer who had been at the palace for 15 years and who reacted to everything with careful, measured expressions, heard the story from 3 separate sources in 1 week. He stored each version carefully, the way he stored everything. He noticed, with the attention of someone who paid very close attention to the palace, that the story did not exist in the North Residential Wing, where the king's personal staff worked, or in the guard captain's office, or in any of the formal administrative channels. It existed entirely in the in-between spaces, the staff rooms, the supply corridors, the places where people were briefly together without being formally so. He noted this because he was a man who noticed things, and because he had been at the palace long enough to know what it meant when a story stayed carefully away from certain rooms. Someone was managing it. Not suppressing it, not erasing it, just keeping it in the informal channels, letting it live in the warm spaces and not in the official ones. He filed this away next to the other thing he had noticed, which was that the East Garden was being tended with more care than usual, that the groundskeepers had been working extra hours on the paths near the magnolia tree, and that a flat stone had appeared near the bench that was not, as far as he could remember, part of the original garden design. He thought about these things for several days. Then he thought about Malin, who was 22 and from Creston and had been here for 3 weeks, and who moved through the palace with the complete, unbothered openness of someone who had not yet learned that the palace required a different kind of moving. He was not worried about her. He found that he could not quite be worried about her, because there was something about the way the story was being tended that made him feel, obscurely, that she was being looked after, that someone was making sure the story stayed in the warm places. He said nothing to her. He said nothing to anyone. He went home that evening and told his wife a version of the story, the broadest outline, and she laughed until she had to put her cup down, and then she looked at him with the particular look she had that meant, what a world. What a good, strange world. He agreed. Malin, for her part, had a new concern. It was a professional concern, and it had developed over the past several days as she continued to observe Chubby with the eyes of someone who was constitutionally unable to switch off her clinical mind. He was looking better. She had said this already, the exercise was having a clear effect on his frame, and he was moving with more ease, more energy, and alertness in his body that had not been there in the beginning. She was genuinely pleased about this. But there was something else she had been watching. It was in his eyes, in the way he looked at her sometimes, particularly in the last few minutes of their visits when she was wrapping up her things and getting ready to leave. There was something there that was heavy, not sad exactly, or not only sad, something older than sadness. Something that had been sitting there for a long time, and had simply become part of his expression, the way certain sadnesses become a permanent feature of a face. She had seen this in patients, not often, but sometimes. The ones who had been carrying something very heavy for so long that they had stopped noticing the weight of it, stopped being able to distinguish between the weight and themselves. She had not said anything about it yet. She was not sure what to say. She was not technically his healer. He was a wolf in a garden. She was an Omega healer from the eastern province who had been here for 3 weeks and who was eating lunch in a space she had found by following a butterfly. She had no standing to ask him about the thing in his eyes. But she was also Malin Foster from Creston, and she had never in her life encountered a creature that seemed to need something and simply done nothing about it. She thought about it all through her Thursday morning shift. She thought about it while she was treating a young beta who had twisted her ankle. She thought about it while she was updating patient records, and while she was eating her breakfast, and while she was packing her lunch. She arrived at the garden carrying 8 dumplings, and a slightly firmer sense of what she wanted to say. Chubby was there already. She sat down. She gave him 3 dumplings before she said anything, because she had learned that he ate better when he was not being watched with intention, and she did not want to make him feel assessed. Then she said quietly, without making it a big thing, "You look tired sometimes, not in your body. Your body looks better than when I first met you." She paused. "In your eyes." He turned his head and looked at her. "I'm not asking you to tell me about it," she said. "I know you are a wolf and cannot answer me directly. I know this might be a completely silly thing to say." She picked at the corner of her thermos cup. "I just wanted you to know that I see it, in case no one else has said so." She looked up at him. "Whatever you are carrying, I see it, and I think you have been carrying it for a long time." He was very still. "You do not have to do anything about that," she said. "I just did not want to sit here for 3 weeks and not say it. Because you have been very good to me, Chubby. You have sat with me every day and let me talk at you and eat my dumplings, and never once made me feel like I was taking up too much space. And she stopped. She cleared her throat. "I just wanted you to know," she said, "that I see you, not just the big comfortable wolf on the stone. I see the thing behind that too." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he moved slowly and rested his head on the edge of the bench beside her. Just there, just resting. The enormous weight of him, so carefully placed, barely any pressure, as if he was asking rather than taking. She put her hand on top of his head, between his ears, very gently. They stayed like that for a while. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that the silence was not already saying. The magnolia petals fell. When she left, she did not say anything else about it. She simply gathered her things, said "see you tomorrow," the same as always, and went back through the hedge. He lifted his head from the bench when she left, and sat very still in the garden for a long time. Nobody came, nobody would. He had cleared his afternoon schedule again, and his staff were accustomed to it now, and the garden was quiet and warm, and the magnolia tree his mother had planted was dropping its flowers one at a time in the slow, unhurried way of a tree that had been doing this every spring for 30 years, and expected to keep doing it. He thought about what she had said. "I see you. Not just the big comfortable wolf on the stone. I see the thing behind that too." Nobody had said that to him in a very long time. Nobody had looked at him since his mother died and said, "I see the thing behind the surface." He sat in the garden until the light was nearly gone. Then he shifted and dressed and walked back into the palace, and he told Cole to cancel his dinner engagement for the evening, and he ate alone in his rooms, and he sat at his desk for an hour without doing anything on the desk, and then he went to the drawer where he had put Dolor's note, and he read it again. "She does not know she is being kind. I thought you should hear it from someone who has seen both things at once." He understood now what Dolors had been telling him. It was not only that Malin did not know who he was. It was that she would have said exactly the same things if she had known. That was what Dolors had seen. That was why she had sent the note. He folded the note and put it back in the drawer, and he sat with that for a long time, that particular knowledge, turning it carefully in his hands like something fragile that he did not want to drop. The next morning he ran his dawn route along the north wall, pushed to his limit, came back covered in sweat and breathing hard. He worked through his training schedule. He ate breakfast that Cole had left for him. He went to his council meetings and his territorial reviews and his diplomatic correspondence with the steady, unhurried competence that ran 7 kingdoms. He did all of that. And at noon he shifted and walked to the east garden and sat on his stone. She came around the corner at her usual time with her lunch bundle and she saw him, and her face did the thing it always did, that open, uncomplicated warmth, no performance, no calibration, just genuine glad. "Chubby," she said, settling onto the bench, "I made a new filling, do not be alarmed, it is an experiment." He ate the experimental dumpling. It was, he decided, excellent. The herb paste Dolars had recommended had made something that was already good into something better. "Good," she said, watching him. He looked at her. "I think that is a yes," she decided. "I am going to make a note of this recipe. I have a notebook where I keep recipes I want to remember." She was already writing in a small notebook she had produced from somewhere in her jacket pocket. "Do you have things like that? Things you write down so you do not forget them?" He thought about the note in the drawer. He thought about the things he carried that he did not write down, because he did not need to write them down, because they had been pressed into him too deep to require recording. He thought about the way the afternoon light hit the magnolia tree at exactly the hour she arrived. He did not answer because he could not answer because he was a wolf and she thought he was a stray, and that was still true, and he was still not going to correct it, not today. But something in him, something that had been sitting very still for a very long time in the place behind his eyes, shifted slightly. Like a window opening. Just a little. Just enough for air. She saw him shift on a Tuesday. She had not meant to see it. She had left the healing wing 20 minutes early because her last patient had cancelled, and because she had a feeling, the kind of feeling that she had learned over 6 years of practice to trust, that the afternoon would be short if she did not take the time while it was available. She had taken the path through the herb garden rather than the usual route, because the herb garden was lovely, and she kept meaning to spend more time in it and never quite did. And from the herb garden, there was a short cut through a gap in the old stone wall that came out at the back of the east garden rather than the front. She came through the gap in the wall. She stopped. There was a man standing in the garden. That was the first thing she registered. A man, tall, very tall, broad through the shoulders in the way that suggested a body that was genuinely built rather than simply large, the kind of breadth that takes years of particular use to develop. He was standing with his back to her, and he was doing something she could not immediately interpret, a kind of stillness that was right at the edge of motion, a held moment before a change. Then the change happened. It happened quickly, not the slow unfold she had seen in nervous wolf shifters who were self-conscious about the process, but with the fluid, practiced ease of someone who had done it so many times it required no more thought than breathing. He shifted, and where the tall, broad man had been, there was a large black wolf, settling onto 4 paws with the unhurried grace of a thing resuming its natural form, and the wolf turned and looked at her and she saw the amber eyes. She had been a healer for 6 years. She had treated wolf shifters, she had been present for shifts. She had never had a reaction to witnessing a shift that went beyond clinical observation, the detached professional attention of someone cataloging a process. What happened now was not that. What happened now was the amber eyes which she knew, which she had been looking into for 3 weeks in this garden, and above them a moment ago a face that she had her mind caught on something, snagged, a flash of recognition that she could not place, like seeing a word in a book that you know but cannot quite remember the meaning of. She knew that face. She did not know where she knew it from. She stood in the gap in the stone wall and stared at the wolf who was staring at her, and there was a long, suspended moment where neither of them moved, and the amber eyes were exactly the amber eyes she knew, but now she also knew the face above them, which meant that Chubby was not a stray, and was not a wolf who had simply found a comfortable garden and decided to stay in it, and was not a creature without a history. "Chubby," she said, because her mouth needed to say something, and that was the name she had. The wolf looked at her. "What happened to your fur?" she said, and she heard herself say it, and she heard how it sounded, and she knew that she was not handling this particularly well, and she also knew that she could not currently do better. The wolf held her gaze, patient as always, unbothered. A long pause. Then he shifted back. She knew she should turn around. She had the presence of mind to understand that this was the correct thing to do, and she did it. Turned to face the gap in the wall, found a particular patch of the old stone at about eye level, and looked at it with great concentration, and waited. Behind her she heard the quiet, unhurried sounds of a person who was redressing with the calm of someone who had done this before in front of other people, and was not embarrassed by it. She waited. She heard him finish. She waited a bit more, and then she turned. He was standing about 6 feet away, fully dressed, in clothes that she now recognized as the kind of clothing that people wore in this palace when they were not wearing uniforms but were still clearly official. Dark and well cut and from quality cloth, a chain at his collar that she had definitely seen before in paintings. In the portraits in the main gallery. In the paintings that lined the south-facing wall on the third corridor, which she walked past every morning on her way to the healing wing, because the south corridor was the direct route, and she had not found a shorter one yet. She had walked past those paintings every single morning. She looked at him. He looked at her. She said, "I am going to need you to put on some clothes before I can process any of this." A pause. "I am," he said, "dressed." His voice was deep and measured, and it matched, she thought, with the specific absent quality of a person still trying to catch up with themselves. It matched the amber eyes exactly. Of course it did. It matched the patience, the steadiness, the quality of someone who had looked at her every day for 3 weeks as if she was simply the most interesting thing in his immediate environment, and that was fine. That was a normal thing to feel. He was fine. She said, "I am aware that was for me." She cleared her throat. "I was buying myself time." He said nothing. She said, "You are the Alpha King." He said, "I am." She said, "You have been eating my dumplings for 3 weeks." He said, "Yes." She looked at the stone she had placed for him to sit on. She looked at the bench. She looked at the magnolia tree. She looked back at him. "I called you Chubby," she said. He said, "Yes." "To your face." "Yes." "Multiple times." "Consistently," he said. She stared at him. He looked back at her with the amber eyes and the exact same expression he always had, which was, she understood now, the expression of a man who had decided something a long time ago and had not changed his mind. "You did not correct me," she said. "No." "Why?" He held her gaze for a moment, and then he said, with the careful directness of someone who had thought about how to say a thing for quite some time, "Because you were not wrong." She opened her mouth. "You were being kind," he said, "and accurate. And you had no idea who I was, and you were kind anyway." He paused. "I did not want to give you a reason to stop." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about 23 days of lunch. She thought about the flat stone she had put down for him because it seemed rude not to. She thought about the 8 dumplings she had made that one morning because she could not sleep, and how she had not even questioned bringing them, who she was making extra for. She thought about the day she had put her hand on his head and said, "I see you," not just the big comfortable wolf on the stone. She thought about his face above the amber eyes for that one suspended moment before he shifted, and the flash of recognition she had felt, and the word she could not quite place. She could place it now. "You were lonely," she said. He was quiet. "Not in a simple way," she said. "Not because you did not have people around you. You have people around you all the time." But she stopped and looked at him, and she said, "I said that to you already, did not I, in a different way?" "You did," he said. "And you put your head on the bench." "I did." She exhaled. She looked at the garden around them, the magnolia, the bench, the stone. She looked at the afternoon light, which was the same golden afternoon light it always was at this hour, coming from the same direction, lying across the same garden. "You came every day," she said. "Yes." "And you did not tell me." "No." She thought about this for a moment. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. "I'm going to need," she said, "some time to think, because I have just discovered that the wolf I have been feeding dumplings and calling Chubby for 3 weeks is the Alpha King of 7 territories, that is a lot of information to receive on a Tuesday afternoon." She picked up her lunch bundle, which she was still holding, and held it against her chest. "I am going to go back to the healing wing, and I am going to think, and I will be back tomorrow at noon." She paused. "And I am going to bring dumplings," she said, "because I made them this morning and they will not keep, and also because I have brought them every day for 3 weeks and I see no reason to stop." She turned to go. Then she stopped. Without turning back, she said, "For what it is worth. You do have kind eyes." She went through the gap in the wall. He stood in the garden and did not move for a very long time. She came back the next day. He was there. He was in human form this time, standing near the bench, and she came through the front entrance of the garden with her lunch bundle and she looked at him, and he was, she understood now with a kind of retrospective inevitability, exactly as impressive in human form as she had told him he would be. The structure she had seen in wolf form, the shoulders especially, was unmistakable. He was also, and she noted this with the clinical precision that was simply how her mind worked, considerably less doughy than he had been when she met him. "You actually took my advice," she said, setting her bundle down on the bench. "I did," he said. "The exercise thing, you genuinely started exercising." "Every morning," he said. "Because I said you should." He held her gaze with those amber eyes. "You were right." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Sit down, please. You are making me tired standing up there looking like that." He sat on the stone. She sat on the bench. She opened her bundle and looked at him for a moment, and then she handed him 3 dumplings and kept 3 for herself, the same as always, and he took them one at a time with the same careful gentleness he had always had, which was, she thought, the same in both forms, and that felt significant. They ate in the same silence they always ate in, which was comfortable, which had always been comfortable, which was apparently comfortable whether he was a wolf or a king, and she thought, eating her dumpling, that this was perhaps the most extraordinary thing about the past 3 weeks, not the situation itself, but the fact that the fundamental nature of the thing had not changed at all. "I told my colleague Clara about you," she said. "About the wolf, she knows most of the story." "I know," he said. "A lot of people in the palace apparently know." "Yes, and you let it happen." He held her gaze. "I wanted you to be able to talk about it. You talk about things, it is who you are." He paused. "I did not want you to have to manage that for me." She looked at him. She thought about Ned the scribe being reassigned to the northern wall. She thought about Harwick's very careful face. She thought about all the machinery of a palace that had apparently arranged itself quietly around her 40 minutes every afternoon to make sure she had her 40 minutes, and nobody had said a word to her, not once. "Good boy," she said without thinking. He looked at her. She felt the back of her neck go warm. "That was force of habit," she said. "I apologize, you are the Alpha King of 7 territories." He said, "I preferred it." She looked at him. He said, "The other version." She said, "Right." They ate the rest of their dumplings. She poured them both tea because she had brought 2 cups today, the same way she had brought extra dumplings on the mornings she could not sleep, without analyzing the reason. He wrapped both hands around the cup, which was the same thing she always did, and drank. The magnolia dropped its petals. "My name is Calder," he said after a while. "I know," she said. "I walked past your portrait every morning." A pause, "And you did not recognize me in wolf form." "You look," she said with great care, "very different in wolf form." He said nothing. "More comfortable," she said. "You look more comfortable." He looked at the garden. "Yes," he said quietly, "I think I was." She turned her cup between her hands and thought about that. She thought about a man who was the most powerful person for a very long way in all directions, who came to a garden every afternoon in wolf form to eat dumplings with someone who did not know who he was, because it was the only place he felt comfortable. She thought about his amber eyes and the heavy thing behind them. "You can still be comfortable here," she said, "even if I know." He turned to look at her. "Nothing has to change," she said. "I still made the dumplings, you still sit on the stone, the magnolia is still there." She met his gaze. "I am still me, you can still be whoever you are when you are here." He held her gaze for a long time. He said, "You are remarkably calm about this." She said, "I am processing, I am just doing it quietly." She drank her tea. "Internally, I have been saying extremely strong things since yesterday afternoon." A pause. What kind of things, he said. That, she said, is between me and my inner life. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, the potential of one, the precursor. Colder, she said, trying it out, hearing how it sounded, finding it true. He looked at her. Okay, she said, I think I can do that. He said, I never stopped thinking of myself as Chubby. She stared at him. The corner of his mouth moved again, more this time. Do not, she said, do not make me laugh right now, I am still adjusting. My apologies, he said. She pressed her lips together. That was terrible, she said. Yes, he agreed. She laughed. It was the same laugh as always, the real one, the surprised one, the one that startled the sparrows. And he sat on his stone and watched her with his amber eyes in the precursor of a smile, and the garden was warm and the magnolia petals fell, and everything was, somehow, still exactly what it had been. The letters started the next morning. She had not been back to her desk for 10 minutes before Clara appeared in the doorway with an expression that said, I know everything and I am dying, and placed on Malin's desk a folded note with the royal seal on it. Malin stared at the seal. Someone very important, Clara said with enormous restraint, sent you a note. Malin picked it up, broke the seal, opened it. Inside was one sentence in very precise, very formal handwriting, the kind of handwriting that took years of deliberate practice to produce. It said, please stay. She sat at her desk for a moment with the note in her hands. She thought about 3 weeks. She thought about a wolf on a stone. She thought about the amber eyes and the weight behind them and the way they had looked at her when she said, I see you, and the way they looked at her when she laughed, which was completely different. She thought about how she had come to this palace for a 4-month rotation, and had not, until this moment, thought about what happened at the end of 4 months. She picked up her pen. She wrote, you did not ask me nicely. 2 words is not asking, try again. She sealed it and gave it to the hallway attendant, and told him it went to the north residential wing. The reply came back in 20 minutes. It said, Malin, please stay, see. She read it twice. She wrote, better, I will think about it. She sent it. The 3rd note arrived an hour later. It said, take as long as you need. I will be in the garden at noon. She put that one in her pocket. She thought about it all morning. She thought about it while treating a patient with a sprained wrist. She thought about it while updating files. She thought about it while eating a very early, very small snack because she was nervous, and nervous eating was one of her less admirable tendencies, and she had not been able to stop herself. She did not know what staying meant. She did not know what it would look like, or what it would require of her, or whether she was the right person for whatever this was. She was 22 and from Creston, and she called the Alpha King Chubby and asked about his exercise. She was the least prepared person in this entire building for whatever this situation was becoming. But she thought about him saying, I did not want to give you a reason to stop. She thought about the flat stone she had put in the garden for him without being asked. At 10 minutes to noon, she packed her lunch and went to the east garden. He was already there. He was in human form, sitting on the stone, the flat stone she had put there, not a chair, not anything grander, and he had his elbows on his knees and he was looking at the magnolia tree, and he heard her coming through the front gate and he turned, and when he saw her, his face did a thing she had never seen it do before. It went still in a different way than usual. Not the controlled stillness of a man managing himself. Just still, quiet, the way things go still when they stop bracing. She sat on the bench. She opened her bundle. She handed him 3 dumplings. He took the first one with the same careful gentleness, which was, she had decided, simply who he was. I am thinking about it, she said, staying. He looked at her. I have not decided, she said. My rotation ends in 6 weeks. I was planning to go back to Creston. I have a life there. She looked at the magnolia. But I also have, she waved a hand vaguely, this. He waited. This is a good thing, she said. Whatever this is, I know that, even with all the, she gestured at the palace around them, all of this. The complication, he said. Yes, the considerable complication, she ate her dumpling. You are very complicated, Calder. Yes, he said. Your life is very complicated. Yes. I had a very uncomplicated life before last Tuesday. He held her gaze, I know. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, you were going to keep coming to the garden, even if I had not found out. You were going to keep sitting on the stone and eating dumplings, and letting me call you Chubby and not saying anything. Yes, he said. For how long? He was quiet for a moment. For as long as you kept coming, he said. She took a breath. She looked at the magnolia. She looked at the bench she was sitting on and the stone he was sitting on and the flat afternoon light and the white petals dropping one at a time. She looked back at him. Tell me something, she said, about yourself, something real, not from a portrait or a council meeting or a territorial review, something that is just you. He considered this. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, my mother planted that tree. She planted it when I was 4. She said it was for the spring, because spring is the hardest season to believe in when you are living through winter. She said you plant things in the ground as proof that you believe the winter will end. Malin looked at the tree. She died when I was 19, he said. I have not sat in this garden since. A pause. Until you, he said. She did not say anything. She gave him the last dumpling. He took it. They stayed in the garden until the light changed, and she did not leave at her usual time, and he did not check the hour, and the magnolia dropped its petals, and neither of them said anything else, and it was still somehow exactly enough. She said it in front of the entire assembled court on a Wednesday morning, and she said it the way she said everything, which was with complete sincerity and no warning. It happened because of a consultation. Dolores had arranged it, not obviously, not in a way that drew attention to itself, but Malin understood now that Dolores arranged most things without drawing attention to herself, and this was one of them. There had been a formal health review scheduled for the palace guard leadership, which happened quarterly, and the head healer was always present, and the king was always briefly present at the opening to confirm the appointment schedule. Malin had been brought in as an additional healer for the review, because 2 of the usual staff were occupied with a situation on the 3rd floor. She had not been told who else would be present at the opening. She arrived in the main court hall, which was large and echoing, and had the particular atmosphere of a room that was used for important things, and she found what appeared to be the entire senior court already assembled, and at the head of the long table Calder. She had been seeing him in the garden every day for a week in human form since the Tuesday of the shift, and she had gotten used to him in a garden context. She had not gotten used to him in this context. This was not the man who sat on a flat stone and told her about a magnolia tree. This was the Alpha King of 7 territories in the full weight of what that meant, in a room that contained some of the most powerful people in the region, all of them arranged with the careful precision of people who understood their position exactly. He saw her come in and he did not alter his expression, which was his usual controlled stillness. But his eyes moved to her in the way they always did when she walked into a space he was already occupying, the same as the garden, and she felt it land the same way it always landed, which was a warmth between the ribs. She found a place to stand with Dolores and the other healers. The opening proceedings began. There were several announcements, the schedule was confirmed, various people spoke. She paid attention as she always did, cataloging information, being professional. Then Calder stood to close the opening session, which was apparently tradition, and he walked toward the head of the table, and he turned, and the light fell on him from the high east windows, and Malin looked at him. She had noticed clinically over the past weeks the progress of the training. She had noted it every day in the garden, the incremental change in his frame, the returning definition, the way he moved now compared to how he had moved the first day she saw him. She had thought about it the way she thought about patient progress, objectively, professionally, with the detached appreciation of a healer who is pleased to see health improving. Standing at the head of the long table in the court hall, in the particular quality of morning light from the east windows, the change was very clear. His shoulders, which she had told him were very good bone structure early on, were fully himself now. The comfortable softness she had first seen, which she had not thought of as a flaw, only as an opportunity, a potential thing not yet reached, was gone. He was, she thought, exactly what she had told him he could be, back in the first week when he was still a wolf on a stone. She thought about saying this. She thought about whether this was the right room to say it. She thought about 6 weeks of watching him improve, and the fact that she had not actually told him, directly in human form, that she had noticed. He was looking at the assembled court. He had not looked at her again since she came in. He was being the king. She said, in a normal conversational volume that nonetheless carried with perfect clarity in the high-ceilinged room, because she was not a quiet person and had never learned to be, "You look much better." The room went very still. Several things happened at once. The heads of everyone in the room turned toward her. Calder's eyes moved to her face. She realized, half a second after saying it, that she had said it to the Alpha King in front of his entire senior court. She pressed on, because she had committed now, and stopping halfway would be worse. "The structure in your shoulders especially," she said, with the brisk professionalism she used when she was discussing a patient's progress. "You have made measurable progress. The work you have been doing is showing clearly." She looked at him with the direct, clinical attention she gave everything. "I am genuinely pleased." A silence developed in the room of the particular quality that develops when everyone present is collectively refusing to react to something. Calder held her gaze. He said in a voice that was perfectly level, "Thank you, Healer Malin." She had heard his voice described in dispatches and diplomatic correspondence as commanding, resonant, the kind of voice that closes rooms. She had been hearing it for a week across a garden bench, and it sounded exactly the same in this hall as it did there, except that the garden version had, occasionally, things in it that this one did not, smaller things, things she was still learning the names of. "I find this assessment accurate," he said to the room. He then continued, closing the session. She stood beside Dolores and felt the warmth in the back of her neck that meant she was going to need a moment, but she kept her face professional, because she was a healer and professional was what she did, and she listened to the rest of the closing without interrupting again. Afterward, in the corridor, Dolores walked beside her in silence for several steps. Then she said, "You said it very clearly." "I did," Malin said. "The entire room heard you." "Yes." Dolores walked in silence for another moment. "He has been training since your 3rd week in the garden," she said. He had not trained in nearly 2 years before that. Malin thought about this. "Because I said he should," she said. "Yes." "Because I called him Chubby." "That is the current understanding," Dolores said. Malin was quiet. "Are you all right?" Dolores asked. "I am," Malin said. "I just need a minute to put all this somewhere in my head where it makes sense." Dolores nodded. "It will probably not make sense for a while," she said, not unkindly. "No," Malin agreed. "Probably not." She went back to the healing wing, and she sat at her desk, and she looked at her patient list, and she thought about shoulders and morning light, and a man who had started running before dawn because a woman he had never met in human form told a wolf that it seemed like a waste to leave all that potential sitting there. She thought about what it meant that he had done that. She thought about the note still in her pocket that said, "I will be in the garden at noon." She went at noon. He was there. She sat on the bench and looked at him, and she said, "I found out this morning that you started training the week after I first mentioned it." "The day after," he said. She stared at him. "The evening of that day," he said. "I went to the gymnasium." She said, "That was the day I told the wolf in my garden that he had good bone structure and needed more activation." "Yes," he said. "You went home after I said that and started working out." "Yes," he said. She put her face in her hands. He waited. She said through her hands, "I am going to sit with this for a moment." "Of course," he said. She sat with it for a moment. She thought about what kind of person hears good bone structure, just needs activation and then goes and starts training, not defensively, not to prove something, but because someone said it was there and waiting, and he believed them, and he went and found it. She thought about what kind of person she had to be for that to have been the response. She took her face out of her hands. "You trusted me," she said. He looked at her. "You did not know me. I was a stranger in your garden, and I said something about your health and you just trusted that I was right and you acted on it." He held her gaze and he said simply, "You were not performing, you had nothing to gain from being honest, so you were honest." He paused. "It has been a long time since someone had nothing to gain." She sat with that. She said, I said it because it was true. I know, he said, that is why. She looked at the magnolia for a while. Then she said, for the record, I was not trying to say anything significant in the court this morning. I just looked at you and thought that and said it. I know, he said again. The entire court was there. Yes. I told the Alpha King in front of his senior court that I was pleased with his progress. You did. She pressed her lips together, and you said you found my assessment accurate. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. I did. She stared at him. Was that funny to you? The corner of his mouth moved more. It was a little funny to me, he admitted. She breathed out through her nose. Good, she said. You are allowed to think things are funny. That is good for you. She opened her lunch bundle. Here, eat your dumpling. He took the dumpling. He ate it with the same careful gentleness, the same as always, human hands now instead of careful amber jaws but the same gesture. And she watched him and thought that she had the very clear and slightly daunting sense that she had been on the edge of something for 3 weeks and had now fully gone over it. She was not sorry. The library was quiet at that hour. Malin had found it by accident in her 4th week, the same way she had found the garden, by following a corridor further than she meant to and ending up somewhere she had not intended. The palace library was enormous and very old and smelled like old paper and stone, and it had deep armchairs near the south windows that caught the afternoon light perfectly, and she had taken to going there sometimes in the evenings when her shift ended late, and she was too tired to walk back to her room but too awake to sleep. She went on the evening of the day the diplomatic emergency broke. She did not know about the diplomatic emergency. It had something to do with the southern borders, and she was not a person who knew about southern border situations because that was not her work. What she knew was that she had been in the healing wing until nearly 9 in the evening, because 3 of the diplomatic party's attendants had developed symptoms of a stomach illness that she had needed to treat and monitor, and by the time she finished her notes and tidied the treatment room and walked to the library, she was carrying the particular weight of a long day in her bones. She found her armchair. She sat down with a medical text she had been meaning to finish for 2 weeks. She read 3 pages. She woke up with the book in her lap and a very vague awareness that time had passed, to the sound of someone else in the room. She opened her eyes. Calder was there. He was standing near the shelves on the far side of the room, looking at the books with the absent attention of a man who had been doing something else, and had ended up here without quite planning to. He had not noticed her. The room was lit by the low night lamps and the tall south windows were very dark now, and the library was quiet in the particular way of a large building at 2 in the morning. She said, Calder. He turned. He looked at her in her armchair with her medical text in her lap and her thermos on the table beside her, which she had brought and apparently not drunk, because she had been asleep before she thought to open it. You are here, he said. I fell asleep, she said, with the slightly blurred honesty of someone newly awake. I was reading. She looked at the book in her lap. I got to page 43. He looked at her for a moment, and then, without appearing to decide to do it, he walked to the chair across from her and sat down. She looked at him. He looked at the shelves. She thought he was going to say something about the emergency, about why he was walking through the palace library at 2 in the morning. He did not. He pulled a book from the shelf beside his chair and opened it, and he read. She looked at him, reading for a moment. Then she looked at her medical text. She read. The library was very quiet. The night lamps were warm. Outside the tall windows, the palace grounds were dark and still. She could hear her own breathing, his breathing, the small sound of a page turning. She thought about the fact that she had sat across from him in a garden every afternoon for weeks, and it had been quiet and comfortable, and she had not had to manage it, had not had to perform or calibrate or decide what she wanted. She had just been there, and he had been there, and it had been enough. This was the same. Different room, different hour, but the same underlying quality of 2 people who did not need to do anything in particular in order to be together. She thought that was a remarkable thing to have found. She thought it in the slightly loose, unguarded way of thoughts that happen when you are 4 pages from where you fell asleep, and are not quite all the way back yet. She drank her thermos, which had gone a little cold. She read. He read. At some point, she registered that he had glanced up from his book and was looking at her. She looked up. He said, "You should sleep properly." She said, "I know, I will go in a minute." She looked at the page. "This chapter is almost finished." He did not push it, he went back to his book. She finished her chapter. She looked at the clock on the wall. She said, "What time is it?" He told her. She said, "I should go." She did not move immediately, because the chair was very comfortable and the library was warm, and she was still not entirely all the way awake. He said, "You can stay." She looked at him. He said, "If you want." He looked at his book. "There is no requirement to leave." She thought about this. She settled back into the chair. "A little longer," she said. He turned a page. She did not read any more. She just sat, and the library was quiet, and the night was deep outside the windows, and she thought about nothing in particular, which was rare for her, because she was usually thinking about several things at once. After a while she said, "Is the emergency resolved?" "Not yet," he said, "in the morning." "Are you worried?" A pause. "No, I know what to do, He stopped. "Needed a moment," she said. "Yes," he said. She understood that. She had the same thing sometimes after a long shift, a need to be somewhere quiet with no requirements. She had found the garden for that. He had apparently found the garden for the same reason before she arrived in it, and had now found his way here. "This is a very good library," she said. "My grandmother built it," he said. "She was the one who started the collection." She said a kingdom without books was only as wide as its own walls. Malin looked at the shelves, the thousands of volumes, the particular smell of paper and stone and time. "She sounds like someone worth knowing," she said. "She was," he said. "A quiet." He said, "She would have liked you." Malin turned to look at him. He was looking at his book, but his face had the slightly unguarded quality it had in the garden, the quality of a man who had let himself be comfortable without quite making a decision about it. She thought about all the people he had clearly loved and lost. She thought about the magnolia tree and the library and the garden at noon and the amber eyes, and the thing behind them that had been sitting there since she first saw it. She said, "Tell me about her, your grandmother." He looked up from his book. She said, "We have time." And he did. He talked in the way he rarely talked, the measured unhurry of a man who was accustomed to saying necessary things in public, and was discovering that saying unnecessary things in private was a different kind of necessary. He talked about his grandmother, her voice, her opinions on cartography and cooking, and the right way to argue a point. He talked with a quality she had not heard from him before, a warmth that was not performed, that simply existed in the telling. She listened the way she always listened, which was completely. The night passed around them. She fell asleep again near 4 in the morning, and he was still in his chair. And when the first gray light came through the south windows, she opened her eyes and found him there, and he had not left, and he was watching her with the amber eyes, and his face in the early light was simply itself, no management, no stone. She said, "Did you sleep?" He said, "A little." She said, "That is not enough." He said, "No," a pause, "but it is more than usual." She looked at him in the gray early light. She said, "Do you want to stay for breakfast?" He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Yes." She found out on a Thursday. It was Clara. Clara had been sitting on information for exactly 3 weeks, because she was a good person who genuinely liked Malin and understood, without being told, that there were things happening around Malin that Malin needed time with, and she had held it accordingly. But 3 weeks was a long time for Clara, and besides, at a certain point it stopped being something she was protecting Malin from, and started being something Malin was going to appreciate knowing. They were eating lunch in the staff room, just the two of them, Eli having gone to the 3rd floor for a patient consult, and Malin was eating her lunch and talking about a patient from that morning in the unhurried way she talked about everything, and Clara ate her lunch and listened, and then she said, "Can I tell you something?" Malin looked at her. "About Chubby," Clara said. Malin said, "You can tell me anything about Chubby." Clara said, "He started training the week after you first suggested it to the wolf." A pause. "I know," Malin said, "he told me." "He told his staff," Clara said, "to put a formal training schedule in place, which is something he had not done in almost 2 years. She paused. And the reason he put it in place, the reason that went around the palace, was that a healer told the wolf in the East Garden that he had good bone structure and was just carrying a little extra softness and needed more activation. Malin said nothing. That story, Clara said, went everywhere in this palace, not because anyone was making fun, because it was, she searched for it. It made people feel something. The idea that someone had just looked at him and said that plainly the way you say everything without any managing of it, and he went and did it because of that. Malin ate her dumpling slowly. He trained for 6 weeks, Clara said. He got up before dawn every morning and ran. He went to the gymnasium every day. She paused. Because you looked at a wolf and told him his potential was just waiting there. Malin put her dumpling down. Clara, she said. And everyone in this palace knows it, Clara said, gently. Everyone knows that the Alpha King has been working out every morning since the Omega healer from Creston called him Chubby. A silence. Then something happened to Malin's face. It started slowly around the corners of her mouth, the way things start when they are real. And then it built and her shoulders started, and then she was laughing, really laughing, the full body surprised, helpless kind of laughing that she had not expected to do, that she could not have predicted, that had nothing mean in it, because there was nothing mean in Malin about anything. She laughed until she had to put her thermos down. She laughed until Clara was laughing too, not even sure exactly why, just because laughing near Malin was almost unavoidable when she started. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. She said he did lunges. Clara said every morning. She said because I called him Chubby. Clara said that is the understanding, yes. She said he is the most powerful man in 7 territories, and he did dawn runs because I told a wolf in a garden to get more activation. Clara, tears at the corners of her eyes now, said, that is correct. Malin pressed her mouth together and looked at the ceiling. She picked up her lunch bundle. I need to go, she said. Where? Clara said. The garden, Malin said. She was still laughing quietly, the residual kind. I need to see him. Right now, I need to see his face. She went to the garden. He was there and she came through the gate still laughing, a quieter laugh now, the kind that sits in the chest after the main event, warm and unhurried. He turned when he heard her. He saw her face. And something happened that she had not seen from him before in any form, not in the garden, not in the library, not in the court hall. His face, which was usually still and steady and very slightly guarded even in the moments when it was open, went soft. Not in the way people go soft when they are sad, in the way things go soft when they finally let go of something they have been holding. She walked up and she shoved the dumpling tin into his hands and she said, Clara told me. He took the tin. About the training, she said, about all of it. He held the tin and looked at her face, at the laughter still in it, and he said nothing. She said, you did dawn runs, Calder. He said, I did. She said, because I told the wolf he needed more activation. He said, you were right. She pressed her lips together. She said, you are the most ridiculous person I have ever met. He held her gaze and he said very quietly, I wanted to be worth what you said. She stopped. The laughter in her face did not go away, but something settled behind it, something that was not laughter at all, something older and quieter that she had been carrying for several weeks in the part of herself that dealt with things she was not yet ready to name. She said, you already were. He was quiet. She said, the first day on the stone. You were already. She stopped and looked at him and said simply, you were already the thing I said you could be. I just said it out loud. He looked at her with the amber eyes and the face that had gone soft, and she understood, looking at him, that nobody had said that to him before, that nobody had looked at him as himself and said you are already the thing. She stepped forward and she put her arms around him. Not carefully, not with calibration, just her arms around him, the way you hold someone when you want them to know you are there. He was still for half a second, the way he had been still the first day when she held the dumpling out on her palm, that moment of not quite believing. And then he held her back, careful as always, his arms around her, and she could feel the shoulders she had told him were very good bone structure, and she had been completely right, and the garden was warm and the magnolia dropped its petals, and she did not say anything else, and neither did he. They stood in the East Garden for a long time. The bonding was in the spring. She had stayed. She had not gone back to Creston at the end of her rotation, because she had written to the Provincial Medical Board 3 weeks before the end of her 4 months and asked for a permanent transfer, and the Provincial Medical Board had, with some surprise and no small amount of administrative confusion, processed the request. Dolores had said nothing when Malin told her. She had looked at her with that look that already knew things, and then she had updated the staff roster, and that had been that. It had not been simple. She had not expected it to be simple. There had been things to navigate: the court, the diplomatic context, the particular complexities of an Omega healer from the Eastern Province and an Alpha King with 7 territorial agreements to manage. And she had navigated them the way she navigated everything, by saying what she meant and asking when she did not know and not apologizing for taking up the space that had been offered to her. His advisors had met with her, several of them in stages, with the careful and formal manner of people who are assessing a situation and want to appear to be merely discussing it. She had answered their questions directly and asked several of her own. Harwick, who was the most careful of all of them, had looked at her at the end of the final meeting with an expression she had not seen from him before, which was, she thought, something close to reassured. She had asked Calder afterward what Harwick had said to him. He said you were thorough. She had said, is that good? He had said from Harwick, yes, that is very good. She had thought about that. The ceremony was in the Great Hall, which she had been in twice before, once for the health review and once for a diplomatic reception that she had attended in her capacity as palace medical staff, standing near the back with Dolores. It looked different today. The morning light from the east windows was very strong and very clear, and it fell across the assembled court the way it had fallen across him that morning when she had told the room his shoulders were excellent. She thought about that morning. She thought about the way his face had been when she walked into the garden laughing, the thing that had happened to it. She thought about a wolf on a stone and a magnolia tree and 6 dumplings in a cloth bundle, and a flat stone she had placed for him because the ground was muddy and it seemed rude not to, and 40 minutes every afternoon that had been, before she knew what they were, the best part of her day. She stood beside him at the head of the hall. He stood beside her with the steadiness he had always had, the kind that was not performed. The ceremony was formal and ancient and very beautiful, and the words had been spoken by the same voice in this hall for generations, and she listened to all of it. When it came to the vow which she had practiced, which she had thought about carefully, which she had written out on paper 3 times before she was satisfied with it, she said what she had planned to say, and she said it clearly and without hesitation. And then, in the half-breath at the end of her last word, before the officiant moved to the next section, she said, very quietly, just barely at the edge of carrying, my wolf. A pause. Then, quieter still, Chubby. The silence in the room had a particular quality. She looked straight ahead. She felt Calder beside her. She heard, distantly, the sound that might have been 3 or 4 people in the back of the assembled court making the carefully suppressed sounds of people who were not going to laugh, were absolutely not going to laugh, were going to carry the memory of not laughing in this room for the rest of their lives. Calder turned his head. She felt him turn, she felt the quality of it. She looked at him. His face was the garden face, the library face, the face from 4 in the morning in the armchairs when the early light came through the windows, unheld, unguarded, simply his. The officiant was looking at him, with the expression of a person waiting to see what happened next. Calder said into the formal silence of the great hall, with his full voice clearly without hesitation, the name stands. 3 witnesses would say afterward they heard him laugh. They were right. That evening they were in the East Garden, because where else would they be? The magnolia was heavy with late flowers, white and wide and perfect in the evening light, and she had brought dumplings because she had made them that morning with the new filling she had been refining for 2 months. And they were, she was prepared to say with confidence, the best batch yet. She sat on the bench. He sat on the stone. The stone was still there. It had been there for months. She suspected it would be there for a very long time, because nobody in this palace moved things that the Alpha King appeared to have chosen, and the stone appeared to have been chosen. She gave him 4 dumplings. He took them one at a time with the same careful gentleness. He ate them with the same focused, unhurried attention. She drank her tea. She said someone left a plate of dumplings outside the great hall this morning, before the ceremony. He said, I heard. She said the whole plate was gone by the time someone went to collect it. He said, yes. She said, the court ate your wedding dumplings. He said, apparently. She looked at the magnolia. That is very good, she said. He looked at the magnolia too. It is, he said. She ate a dumpling. She thought about all the things that had happened between a Tuesday afternoon and tonight, the things that had added up one at a time, one day at a time, one lunch and one note and one library night and one conversation at a time. And she thought that if she had not followed the butterfly through the gap in the hedge that first day, if she had found a different bench, if she had turned and walked away from the enormous black wolf sitting on her lunch. She tried to imagine the shape of a world in which any of those other things had happened, and she found she could not. She had turned the corner and there he was. That was all. That was, as far as she could tell, how the important things happened. She looked at him now in the evening light in wolf form because it was evening and the garden was private, and he shifted when he was relaxed, which she loved about him, that he had come back to that. He was, she noted, not remotely doughy anymore. He was, in fact, quite definitively the impressive thing she had always said was underneath. But he was also sitting on his stone with his tail around his paws, and his amber eyes watching the magnolia with that deep, familiar patience, that steadiness that had been there from the very first day, and she thought that she had been right the first time too. Both things were true. She said, come here. He moved from the stone and lay down with his head in her lap, which he did not do often, only in the evenings, only here, only when the garden was very quiet and the light was low and the day was done. She put her hand between his ears. She said, see, you were never astray. He was still under her hand, heavy and warm and entirely, finally, without any effort at all, at rest. The magnolia dropped its last petal of the evening. She sat in the garden until the stars came out.